Hello everybody, welcome to PJ Chapter Book Time for Tuesday, May 5th. Happy Cinco de Mayo. We are enjoying this great story by Beverly Cleary called Henry Huggins. When we started the book yesterday, we got introduced to Henry and his pal Ribsy over here, whom they befriended each other actually. Ribsy was a stray, and Henry was given permission to bring Ribsy home as long as he could get him home on the bus. And so the chapter yesterday was mostly about that adventure, about how Henry had to very creatively figure out a way to smuggle Ribsy aboard the bus, who had the rule that there were no animals allowed. It was very entertaining. So tonight, we're reading chapter 2, and it's called Gallons of Guppies. Intriguing title. Every afternoon after school, Ribsy waited for Henry under a fir tree in the corner of the schoolyard. 4 days a week, they ran home to the shortest way, past the park, up the hill, and through the vacant lot. On Fridays, however, they walked home the long way round past the Rose City drugstore, the supermarket, the Ideal barbershop, and the Lucky Dog pet shop. At the pet store, they stopped while Henry bought 2 pounds of horse meat from Mr. Pennycuff. Henry liked to go to the pet store. The windows were full of puppies and kittens, and just before Easter, rabbits and baby chicks and ducks. Inside there was usually a parrot or a monkey, and once there'd been a deodorized skunk. Henry thought it would be fun to have a skunk following him around, but when he found out it cost $40, he gave up on that idea. But best of all, Henry liked the fish. One side of the store was covered with rows of little tanks. Each aquarium contained green plants that grew underwater, snails, and a different kind of tropical fish. Henry always stopped to look into each tank. He liked the dollar-sized black and silver-striped angelfish and the inch-long orange moonfish with their velvety fins and tails. He thought the tiny catfish were fun to watch because they stayed on the bottom of the tanks, rolled their eyes, and used their whisker-like barbels to feel around in the sand for food. Mr. Pennycuff explained that the fish came from all over the world, but most of them came from jungle rivers where the water was warm. That was why they were called tropical fish. Makes sense. One Friday when Henry went to the pet store, he saw a sign that read, "Special offer. 1 pair of guppies, fish bowl, 1 snail, aquatic plant, package of fish food, all for, you ready for it, 79 cents. "Oh, jeepers," said Henry. "All that for 79 cents? He looked at the fish in the bowls. Each bowl had 1 plain silvery gray fish, almost 2 inches long, and 1 smaller fish with all the colors of the rainbow. "Oh, that's really a bargain." "Well, it certainly is," agreed Mr. Pennycuff. "Shall I wrap up a pair for you?" Henry felt around in his pocket. The silver dollar that his grandfather had given him was still there. He watched the little rainbow fish chase the silvery fish and decided he had to have a pair of guppies. After all, it was his very own money he was spending. He would keep them on the dresser in his room. They would just stay in his room and swim quietly around in the bowl. He didn't see how his mother could object to 2 quiet little fish that didn't bark or track in mud or anything. Makes sense. "I'll take a pair," Henry told Mr. Pennycuff, and watched him fasten waxed paper around the top of the bowl with a rubber band and put it into a bag. "Now be sure to put the bowl near a heater in cold weather so the fish don't get chilled and catch ick." "Ick," said Henry. "Yes, ick. It's short for, you ready for it? Ichthyrophthirius. When fish get chilled, they catch ick and are covered with tiny white spots. Yikes, said Henry. Maybe there was more to keeping guppies than he thought. Oh, don't worry, said Mr. Pentecost. They can stand water down to 60 degrees. If it were that cold in the house, you'd have the heat on. Well, that sounded easy. How often do I change the water? Asked Henry. Well, you shouldn't have to change the water. The snail does a pretty... the snails help to keep it clean. Just give the fish a tiny pinch of food once a day. It's only when the fish don't eat all their food, or when you have too many fish in a bowl, that the water gets dirty. Mr. Pentecost gave Henry his change. I didn't know that, said Henry. I'm glad you told me. Here, Ribsy. He handed Ribsy his package of horse meat. Oh, I don't know if that was a good idea. The dog took it in his mouth, and they left the pet store. You'll have to carry your meat all the way home today. And don't you stop and try to eat it before we get home, either. It has to last you a few days. Ribsy wagged his tail and trotted on ahead of Henry with the meat. Henry tried to walk without jiggling the package. He didn't want to slosh the guppies any more than he had to. When Ribsy was half a block ahead of Henry, he dropped his package and looked back at Henry. Then he began to tear the paper off the meat. Hey, cut that out, yelled Henry. He started to run, but the water in his fishbowl sloshed and he had to stop. Just to be safe, Ribsy picked up the meat, trotted farther down the sidewalk, and finished tearing off the paper. Stop that, you old dog! Again, Henry tried to run. This time, he held the bowl. Straight out in front of him, but the water still sloshed. Ribs gobbled part of the meat and then trotted ahead with the rest of it in his mouth. Just as Henry was almost close enough to reach for the meat, Ribsy put on a burst of speed. Ribsy, you come here! The dog ignored Henry. Oh, I'll get you for this. Henry was really angry now. He set his package of guppies on the sidewalk and ran after his dog. This time, Henry caught up with him. Henry grabbed one end of the meat and pulled Ribsy, growling deep in his throat. Ribsy, growling deep in his throat, hung on to the other end and pulled. The dog had a better grip on the meat because he could sink his teeth into it. Henry found that the raw meat was cold and slippery. You let go that meat! Ribsy growled more fiercely. He sounded as if he meant it. The harder Henry pulled, the louder Ribsy growled. Henry was sure Ribsy wouldn't really bite him, but just the same, he knew it was not a good idea to annoy any animal while it was eating. That is really good advice. Anyway, he couldn't stand there all afternoon playing tug of war with a piece of horse meat. His guppies might get cold. All right, you old dog, go ahead and eat it. See if I care. You'll just have to eat canned dog food for the rest of the week. He went back to his guppies while Ribsy wolfed down the rest of the meat, licked his chops, and then, with his stomach bulging, followed closely at Henry's heels the rest of the way home. When they reached Henry's house on Clickatat Street, Henry opened the door and yelled, Hey, Mom, come and see what I bought with the silver dollar that Grandpa gave me. Oh, that has his mom nervous. Oh, and it did. Oh, I'm afraid to look, answered his mother from the kitchen. What is it this time? Fish. Fish? Mrs. Huggins sounds surprised. Did you want me to cook it for dinner? Henry carried his package into the kitchen. No, Mom, you don't understand. Not dead fish. Live fish, swimming around in a bowl of water. They're called guppies. Guppies? Yes, just 2 little fish. I'll keep them on my dresser, and they won't be any trouble at all. They were on sale at the pet shop. They were a bargain. See, Mom? Henry gently lifted the fishbowl out of the bag. Mrs. Huggins put down the potato she was peeling. Aw, why, Henry, that's a pretty little fish. I thought you'd like them. Henry was pleased. His mother bent closer to the fishbowl. But Henry, what are those little dark things in the water? What little dark things? Henry looked closer. Why, they're baby fish, Mrs. Huggins exclaimed. There must be 15 or 20 of them. Baby guppies! Henry was delighted. Look, Mom, did you ever see such teeny-weeny little fish? Ah, golly, they're so little. Just about all you can see are their eyes and their tails. Mrs. Huggins sighed. Oh, Henry, I'm afraid they won't be teeny-weeny little fish very long. They're going to grow, and then what are you going to do with them? I don't know. I'll ask Dad. Henry was worried. Maybe he knows about baby guppies. But when Mr. Huggins came home from work, Henry was disappointed to learn that he knew nothing about little guppies. Why don't you get a book about guppies from the library? What a great idea, he suggested. Mrs. Huggins said there would be time before dinner, so Henry found his library card, and he and Ribsy ran all the way to the library. Hello, Henry, said the lady in the boys and girls room at the library. Have you come for another book about G-Nats and ogres? This was a joke between the librarian and Henry. When Henry had first started reading fairy tales by himself, he returned a book and asked for another about G-Nats and ogres. He felt a little silly about it now, although he secretly thought that G-Nats and ogres sounded better than giants and ogres. No, I want a book about guppies, Henry answered. I have some baby guppies and I don't know how to take care of them. So the librarian found a book on hobbies with a chapter on fish, but it did not tell much about guppies. Just a minute, Henry, she said. Maybe there is something in the adult room. She returned with a thick book about tropical fish. It was full of colored pictures. I'm sure this will help you, she said, but I'm afraid it's too hard for you to read. I'll let you take it out on your card if you think your mother and father will help you with it. Oh, I'm sure my dad will help. The librarian stamped the book on his card, and Henry, proud to have a grown-up book stamped on his card, ran home with it. After dinner, Mr. Huggins sat down to read the fish book while Henry went to his room to watch his guppies. This time he counted, 38 babies. After a while, his father came in with the book in his hand. This is a mighty interesting book, Henry, but you're going to need some more fish bowls. According to this book, you can't keep so many fish in one bowl. Dad, where am I going to get more bowls? Well, maybe we can find something in the basement. So Henry and his dad rummaged through the basement until they found a gallon jar that Mrs. Huggins used for making dill pickles. Wow, this should do, said Mr. Huggins. They carried it upstairs and washed it out. Mr. Huggins filled it with hot water and carried it into Henry's room. Now, when the water cools, we can move some of the little guppies. They can't live in cold water right out of the faucet. They need water that has stood, or hot water that is cooled. While it's cooling, we can make a net. He found a piece of wire and bent it into a circle. Mrs. Huggins took an old stocking and sewed it to the square to make a little fish net. Henry and his father took turns catching the tiny fish with a net and moving them into the pickle jar. Henry was surprised that such small fish could swim so fast. The next day and every day after that, Henry looked at his guppies the first thing in the morning. When he came home from school, he looked at his guppies before he went into the kitchen for something to eat. His fish grew and grew. As the weeks passed, the big guppies had more little guppies, and the little guppies grew up to be bigger guppies and had little guppies of their own. Henry had hundreds of guppies. He couldn't find any more pickle jars, so he started using his mother's quart fruit jars. He couldn't keep many fish in a quart of water, though. Henry had jars on his dresser He had them on the table by his bed. He put jars on the floor all around the edge of his room. When he had one row of jars all the way around the floor, he started another one. "Oh, goodness, Henry," his mother said. "Pretty soon you won't be able to walk in here." "If you keep all your guppies," his father said, "by the end of the year you'll have over 1,000,000 fish in your bedroom." "Oh, golly," said Henry, "1,000,000 fish in my bedroom? Wouldn't that be something to tell the kids at school?" Henry was glad when summer vacation started. It took him so long to feed his fish that he no longer had time to play with the other children. He spent all his allowance on fish food and snails and plants for his jars. He slept with his window shut if he thought that the night were going to be cold. He wasn't going to have his fish getting sick if he could help it. All day long, the boys and girls in the neighborhood rang the doorbell and asked to see Henry's fish. Finally, his mother said, "Henry, this can't go on. You must get rid of some of those fish. You'll have to give them to your friends." Henry liked each fish so much he couldn't decide which one he liked best. They were all so lively, swimming around in their little fruit jars. Henry didn't see how he could part with any of them. But now that he was on the third row of jars around his room, he decided to try. He started asking his friends in the neighborhood if they would like to have some fish. Scooter didn't think that he had time to take care of fish. He delivered the shopping news 2 days a week. Mary Jane said her mother wouldn't let her have any fish. Mary Jane's mother was very particular. Robert said he would rather come over and look at Henry's fish than take care of guppies himself. Finally, Beezus said that she would take one fish. Beezus's real name was Beatrice, but her little sister Ramona called her Beezus, and now everyone else did too. Beezus and Ramona already had a cat, 3 white rats, a turtle, 1 fish, so 1 fish wouldn't make much difference. It took Henry a long time to decide which guppy to give her. Then one morning, Mrs. Huggins came home from the supermarket with 3 lugs of apricots in the back seat of her car. I don't know what a lug is. Must be like a crate. When Henry helped her carry them into the house, she said, "Henry, run down to the basement and bring up about 20-quart jars. These apricots are so ripe, I want to start canning them right away." Henry, do you remember what he was using to put his fish in? It's not going to be good. Henry went down to the basement. He did not come back with 20-quart jars. He came back with 4. "These are all I could find, Mom," he said. "Oh, no, and one of them has a crack." Mrs. Huggins looked at the 3 lugs of apricots. Then she looked at Henry. "Henry," she said, and he knew from the way she said it that she meant whatever she was going to say, "Go to your room and bring me 17-quart jars. And don't bring me any jars with guppies in them either." "Yes, Mom," said Henry in a meek voice. He went to his room and looked at the jars of guppies. He guessed he really did have too many fish. But they were such nice fish. He got down on his hands and knees to look at his pets. "Henry," his mother called, "I'm starting to pit the apricots. You're going to have to hurry." "Okay." Henry took his net and started catching the smallest guppies. The only thing he could do was to move them in with the other fish. He hated to do it because the fish book said they shouldn't be crowded. When the guppies were moved, he carried the jars into the kitchen and poured the water down the sink. "I'm sorry," Henry, his mother said, "but after all, I did tell you some time ago that you couldn't go on putting guppies in fruit jars." "I know, Mom. I guess I'll have to think of something else." It took Henry the rest of the morning to feed his fish. He had to put the tiniest pinch of the finest food into each jar. He could hear Robert and Beezus playing cowboy in the vacant lot. Ribsy trotted into his room, watched him for a few minutes, and then went outdoors. Henry began to wish that he were outdoors too, but he couldn't let his little fish go hungry. Late that afternoon, Mrs. Huggins drove downtown to pick up Henry's father after work. When they returned, Henry saw his father carrying more lugs of apricots into the kitchen. He had a feeling he knew what was coming, and it came. "Henry," his mother said, "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you for some more fruit jars." Henry sighed. "Oh, I guess I'll have to double them up some more." He started to go to his room, and then he turned back. Say, Mom, are you going to can anything besides apricots this year? "Yes, tomatoes and pears. And I thought we might go out to Mount Hood and pick huckleberries. You like huckleberry pie during the winter, don't you?" Henry certainly did like huckleberry pie. He liked it any time of the year. He went to his room and moved around more of his guppies. Tomatoes, pears, huckleberries. He could see that his mother would need all of her fruit jars before the summer was over. That would leave his original bowl and the gallon pickle jar. "Hey, Mom, are you going to make dill pickles too?" Guess what she said. "Yes, Henry." There went the pickle jar. By the end of the summer, Henry would have to move hundreds of fish that he had now, and goodness knows how many more, back into the bowl. There would be so many fish there wouldn't be room for any water. That settled it. Henry decided he would have to get rid of all his guppies. So what would you do? What would be your plan if you all of a sudden had hundreds of fish that you needed to get rid of and none of your friends seemed to want any? I don't know, maybe let them go somewhere? Oh, they're tropical fish. That's probably not going to work. I don't know. Let's see what he comes up with. He hated to do it, but if he kept even two, he would soon be right back to where he was now. It would be nice to have time to play outdoors again. Henry made up his mind to take every one of his fish back to the Lucky Dog pet shop. Problem solved. Maybe Mr. Pennycuff would have another sale. Henry was chasing a guppy with a net when his father came into the room. He told his father what he planned to do. "I sure hate to do it," he mourned, "but I can't keep 1,000,000 guppies in my bedroom." He looked sorrowfully at his fish. "I know, Henry. I hate to see the fish go too, but they're getting out of hand. I'll tell you what to do. Catch all the guppies, put them into the pickle jar. It won't hurt them to be crowded for a little while. And right after supper, I'll run you down to the pet shop in the car." So Henry sadly packed up his fish, and after supper he and his father and Ribsy got into the car and drove to the pet shop. I think this is going to work out, I wonder. Ribsy liked to ride in the car. "I brought you lots of guppies," Henry said to Mr. Pennycuff. "I hope you can use them." "Use them!" exclaimed Mr. Pennycuff. "I certainly can. I haven't had a guppy in this store since the sale. Let me see them." Ooh, that sounds like this just might work out. While Henry unwrapped his pickle jar, his father looked at the tanks of tropical fish along the wall. "I should say you do have a lot of guppies," said Mr. Pennycuff. "Nice healthy ones, too. You must have taken good care of them." He held the jar up to the light and looked at it closely. It seethed with gray guppies and rainbow guppies and baby guppies of all sizes, swimming around and around. Let's see. Well, Mr. Pennycuff continued to stare at the fish. Henry couldn't understand why he was muttering to himself that way. He had given Mr. Pennycuff the guppies, and now he wished he would return the pickle jar so he could go. "Well, now," said Mr. Pennycuff, "I guess these fish are worth about $7. I can't give it to you in money, but you can pick out $7 worth of anything in the store you want." $7? Henry was astounded. $7 worth of anything in a pet shop? He was rich. He had been so busy thinking about getting rid of the guppies that it had not occurred to him that they might be worth something to Mr. Pennicuff. "Hey, Dad, did you hear that? $7, Henry shouted. Excuse me 1 second. That's reading out loud makes my throat tickle. I certainly did. You better start looking around. Take anything you want, Sonny. Dog colors, kittens, birdseed, anything. Henry just tried to decide what he would like. Ribsy had a collar and a leash and a dish, so he didn't need anything. He looked at the kittens. The sign read, "Kittens, $1 each." Oh, they were cute. But Henry decided that he didn't want $7 worth of kittens. Ribsy would chase them. "You don't happen to have any skunks on sale for $7, he asked hopefully. "No, I haven't had any skunks for a long time." "I'm glad to hear that," said Mr. Huggins. Henry looked at the tropical fish. Then he looked all around the store and came back to the tropical fish again. He stopped to watch a little catfish busily digging in the sand. Excuse me. Suddenly, Henry knew that the only thing in the store he really wanted was more fish. "Could I keep a catfish in my bowl?" he asked Mr. Pennicuff. "No, Sonny, they have to be kept in warm water. They need an electric heater and a thermostat in the water to keep the water the right temperature." He held up 2 long glass tubes. One looked as if it were filled with sand and the other with wires. "See, this is what I mean. They fit into the corners of an aquarium like this and keep the water warm all the time." He lifted them into the corner of a little tank on the table. "How much does that cost?" "Well, the tank is $3, and the heater and the thermostat come to $4. That makes $7. Henry was disappointed. "Well, I wouldn't have any money left for a catfish, and the only thing I really want is more fish." I wonder how this is going to work out. What do you think? Me too. "You know, Henry, I hoped you'd say that," answered his father. "I hated to see those guppies go as much as you did. If you buy the tank and the heater and the thermostat, I'll buy the fish." We were right. That's what I thought was going to happen. "Ah, gee, Dad, that's swell. Let's get a little catfish." Then Henry thought of something. Do catfish have as many babies as guppies?" he asked Mr. Pennicuff. "Oh, my, no. Catfish rarely have babies when they're kept in tanks. They mostly have them when they live outdoors in ponds and rivers." "Ah, swell," said Henry. "That's the kind of fish that we want." "Oh, won't Mom be surprised?" And I want to show you this picture. It's kind of small, but I think I'll hold it up close. And there is Henry admiring his wonderful fish tank with his catfish in it. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's chapter. That was quite a story. Next week, when we read, well, actually tomorrow, when we read, we're going to read about Henry and the night crawlers. Oh my! Did you happen to listen to us read the story about the fried worms? Well, it reminds me of that. So I hope you have a good night's rest, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.